Welcome back to the channel. I am so glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and let me know in the comments what city you are watching this from. You will not believe how quickly someone you thought loved you can turn against you when money is involved. The Texas sun beat down on the 500 acres of the Bennett estate as I stared out the window of my study. Oil wells dotted the landscape like mechanical giants, pumping the black gold that had been my family's fortune for 3 generations. My grandfather had started with nothing but determination and a stroke of luck, and now the Bennett Oil Company was worth $80 million. Not that you could tell by looking at me at 68 years old. I preferred sensible shoes over designer labels, and I rarely bothered with makeup these days. "Mrs. Bennett, I have brought you your tea," said Martha, my housekeeper of 20 years. "Thank you, Martha. Just leave it on the desk." I did not turn away from the window. These past 5 years since Richard passed away, I had found myself looking at those oil wells more and more. They were constant. They were reliable. Unlike family. Martha hesitated at the door. "Will you be needing anything else, ma'am?" "No, that is all for now." I finally turned toward her with a smile that did not quite reach my eyes. "Actually, has Andrew called today?" Martha's expression said it all before she even spoke. "No, ma'am, not today." I nodded, dismissing her with a gentle wave of my hand. My son had not called in 3 weeks, not since our last argument about Victoria's birthday party. I was not invited, of course. 5 years of marriage to my son and Victoria still treated me like an inconvenience instead of family. The mansion felt way too big these days. Its 14 rooms featured hand-carved mahogany crystal chandeliers and Persian rugs that were worth more than most people's cars. Richard and I had filled it with laughter once, and then Andrew's childhood had brought even more joy. Now, it just echoed with emptiness. It was a museum of a family that was fracturing right before my eyes. I sat at my desk reviewing the quarterly reports from our oil fields. 30 years as a prosecutor had taught me how to read between the lines. It taught me how to spot inconsistencies and lies. I had retired when Richard got sick, but those skills never really left me. The company was doing well despite the volatility in oil prices. Not that Andrew showed much interest. He'd always been more concerned with spending money than understanding exactly how it was made. The crunch of tires on the gravel driveway caught my attention. I was not expecting any visitors. Getting up from my chair, I walked over to the windows and saw Andrew's black BMW pulling up the circular driveway. My heart leaped for a second before caution tempered my excitement. My son rarely visited without wanting something. Even from a distance, I could see the heavy tension in his shoulders as he slammed the car door shut. Andrew had always been handsome in that polished high school prep sort of way. He was tall, with Richard's strong jawline and my dark eyes. But lately, something had changed. His usual confidence had been replaced by a nervous energy that unsettled me. I went back to my desk, pretending to be completely absorbed in my work, when he burst in without knocking. "Mom," he said. His expensive suit was wrinkled and his usually perfect hair was a mess. "We need to talk." I set down my reading glasses and studied my son's face. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and there was a slight tremor in his hands that he tried to hide by shoving them deep into his pockets. "Of course, honey, have a seat." I pointed to the leather chair across from my desk. "You look terrible. Is everything okay?" "Thanks for the pep talk," Andrew muttered, collapsing into the chair. He ran a hand through his hair, making it stick up even more. "Look, I am just going to get straight to the point. I need money. A lot of money." Here we go again. I kept my expression completely neutral, even though my heart sank. Andrew's business ventures had a long history of requiring my financial intervention. His last startup was some kind of restaurant rating app. It had cost me $300,000 before it failed spectacularly. Before that, it was a clothing line that never even made it past the design phase. "How much?" I asked, even though I suspected I would not like the answer. $100,000. The number hung in the air between us like smoke from a gunshot. It was more than he had ever asked for all at once, and the way he said it, like he was just asking for a cup of coffee, set off every single alarm bell in my head. That is a substantial amount of money, Andrew. What exactly is this venture? It is a tech startup. He said the words, rushing out in a rehearsed hurry. A revolutionary online marketing platform that is going to change everything. My partner has connections with Fortune companies, and we are projecting 7-figure profits in the very first year. I had heard different variations of this exact same song before, and it never ended well. Who is your partner? Andrew's eyes darted away from mine. You do not know him. He is from California. Does he have tech experience? A proven track record? What is his name? Mom, why does it even matter? Andrew snapped, leaning forward. The opportunity is what matters here. You would not understand the technical aspects of it anyway. The evasion was very telling. In my years as a prosecutor, I had learned how to recognize the sound of a lie being born. Andrew was hiding something, and whatever it was, it required $100,000 to fix. Andrew, we have had this conversation before, multiple times. I have supported your entrepreneurial dreams very generously, and not a single one has been successful. Maybe it is time for you to try building something with your own resources. The transformation was immediate and terrifying. Andrew's face darkened and his hands clenched into tight fists in his lap. For a brief moment, I saw something in his eyes that reminded me of his father during our absolute worst moments. It was right before I almost divorced Richard over his attempt to manipulate me out of my inheritance. My own resources. Andrew's voice rose almost to a shout. What resources, Mom? I am drowning here. Do you have any idea what it is like to live in the shadow of all this? He gestured wildly at the opulent study all around us. Everyone expects me to be successful just because I am a Bennett. But how can I compete when you control absolutely everything? I have given you every single advantage, I said quietly, keeping my voice level even though my pulse was racing. The best schools, connections, seed money, advantages. Andrew laughed bitterly. You have given me just enough to fail spectacularly, just enough to make me look like a spoiled rich kid who cannot make it on his own, but you never gave me enough to actually succeed. The accusation hurt because it held a tiny grain of truth. I had been careful with how much money I gave Andrew, maybe a little too careful. But I had seen way too many wealthy families completely destroyed by children who never learned the value of hard work. Andrew, calm down. Let us talk about this rationally. There is nothing to talk about. He stood up so abruptly that his chair wobbled backward. I need that money, and I need it right now. This is not a request, Mom. It is a necessity. Something in his tone made my blood run cold. This was not the petulant demand of a spoiled child anymore. It was something completely different. It was something that felt dangerously close to a threat. The answer is no. Andrew, I am not going to invest in another one of your ventures. He stared right at me. His breathing was heavy, and then something shifted in his expression. His eyes narrowed. They grew cold and calculating. Just give me the money, Mom, he said, his voice suddenly soft and menacing. You are going to die soon anyway. The words hit me like a physical punch. My own son wanted me dead, not just in the abstract way that heirs sometimes anticipate an inheritance, but in a concrete, immediate way that chilled me right down to the bone. Andrew Bennett, I said, my old prosecutor voice emerging firm and hard. I think you need to leave right now. He stood there for another moment, and then his face changed again. A mask slipped perfectly into place. I did not mean that. I am just stressed out. Things have been difficult at home. But it was too late. I had already seen what was hiding beneath that mask, and I could not unsee it. There is something you are not telling me. I asked very carefully. Are you in some kind of trouble? For just a split second, his mask slipped completely. I saw pure fear in his eyes. I saw desperation and something that looked like genuine panic. Then the cold expression returned, and he headed straight for the door. "Forget I even asked," he said without turning around. "I will figure it out on my own." As Andrew's BMW roared down the driveway, kicking up gravel and dust, I stood alone in my study. I felt like I had just dodged a bullet that I did not even understand. Something was very wrong with my son, and whatever it was, it required $100,000 to fix. I picked up the phone to call my private investigator, but then I set it back down. Andrew was my son. He was my own flesh and blood. Whatever trouble he was in, we could solve it together. That single decision would almost cost me my life. The next morning, I could not shake the deep unease that had settled over me after Andrew's visit. I caught myself jumping at tiny noises and double-checking that all the doors were locked. They were old habits from my days prosecuting dangerous criminals. My son's words just kept echoing inside my mind. "You are going to die soon anyway." I tried to rationalize it as stress, just a terrible slip of the tongue. But my instincts, the exact same instincts that had helped me put countless criminals behind bars, were screaming that something was deeply wrong. Over breakfast, I called Jonathan Hayes. He was an old friend who had worked with me back at the district attorney's office. "Gloria?" His familiar voice was warm with surprise. "It has been way too long. How are you holding up?" "I have been better, John," I admitted, cradling my cup of coffee. "I was wondering if you could do a favor for me, very discreetly." "Name it." "My son Andrew came to see me yesterday asking for a very large sum of money. Something about his behavior really worried me. Could you look into his finances? See if he is in some kind of trouble." There was a heavy pause on the line. "Is this serious, Gloria? Are you absolutely sure you want to go down this road?" "I am not sure about anything anymore," I said, watching an oil well pump up and down in the distance. "But something is not right, and I need to know exactly what I am dealing with. I will see what I can dig up. In the meantime, please be careful, Gloria. Family disputes can turn ugly very fast." After I hung up, I tried to focus on my normal activities. I reviewed company reports, planned out the garden renovations, anything to keep my mind off the growing knot of dread in my stomach. But every single time the phone rang or a door closed, I found myself tensing up, just waiting for the other shoe to drop. It happened 2 days later. I was out in the garden pruning the rose bushes that had been my only comfort since Richard passed away. That is when I heard the crunch of tires on the gravel once again. Standing up from my knees, I brushed the dirt off my gardening pants and peeked around the hedge to see Andrew's BMW. But this time, Victoria was with him. They stepped out of the car with a choreographed precision that immediately put me on high alert. Victoria looked absolutely stunning as always. She was tall and slender with flawless dark skin, high cheekbones, and the kind of presence that demanded attention in any room she walked into. Her cream-colored dress probably cost more than what most people made in a week, and her makeup was totally flawless despite how early it was. Everything about their arrival felt completely staged. The timing was exactly at 10 in the morning. It was not early enough to seem anxious, but not late enough to seem disrespectful. Victoria's pristine appearance and the careful way Andrew guided her up the walkway looked exactly like actors hitting their marks on a stage. I retreated into the kitchen, quickly washed my hands, and tried to compose myself. The doorbell rang right as I was drying my hands on a dish towel. "Mother," Andrew said when I opened the heavy front door. His voice carried a forced warmth that did not reach his eyes at all. "I am so sorry we did not call ahead. Victoria had the lovely idea to bring you some breakfast." Victoria stepped forward with a smile that was all teeth and zero warmth. "Gloria, darling, it has been way too long." She air-kissed near my cheek, her expensive perfume momentarily overwhelming my senses. "I brought you some coffee from that little boutique downtown. It is the Ethiopian blend with Madagascar vanilla that you mentioned you liked that one time. I had never ever mentioned liking any such blend. That was the very first red flag. The second red flag was the way Victoria was watching me. She stared with an intensity that felt completely predatory, like a cat watching a mouse walk right into a trap. "How incredibly thoughtful of you," I said, stepping aside to let them in. "Let us head into the kitchen. I was out gardening, so please excuse my appearance." "You look wonderful as always, Mother," said Andrew. Yet another false note. He had been criticizing my outdated gardening clothes for years. In the kitchen, Victoria set down a tray carrying 2 steaming cups of coffee in delicate porcelain mugs. They looked suspiciously like the ones from my own cabinet. She must have brought them in from the car while I was washing my hands. "I prepared this one especially for you," Victoria said, handing one of the mugs to me with a wide smile. "I really hope you enjoy it." The coffee smelled off. Not exactly bad, but sharp and bitter. It had an underlying chemical scent that strongly reminded me of almonds mixed with something medicinal. After 30 years of prosecuting criminals, including several poisoning cases, I recognized the smell of cyanide. It was subtle, but incredibly distinct to a trained nose. Every single nerve in my body was screaming that something was wrong, but I kept my expression completely neutral as I accepted the cup. I noticed how Victoria watched me with an intensity that felt clearly sinister. "How very thoughtful, my dear," I said, studying her face closely. "Are you not going to join me?" "Oh, I already had my morning coffee," Victoria said lightly, touching her stomach. "Too much caffeine just makes me jittery." Andrew lingered right in the doorway of the kitchen, and I noticed that he refused to meet my eyes. His usual nervous energy had been replaced by a strange, heavy stillness. It made him look as if he were holding his breath. Whenever I glanced his way, he quickly looked away, focusing entirely on his phone with obvious discomfort. "Andrew tells me that the two of you had a little disagreement the other day," Victoria said, settling gracefully into the chair right across from me. "Something about business opportunities and family support." The way she said family support made it sound like a strict obligation instead of a choice. I noticed she had not taken a single sip of her own coffee yet, despite enthusiastically encouraging me to drink mine. "We had a brief discussion about financial boundaries," I said very carefully. "Andrew has wonderful entrepreneurial energy, but I believe it is crucial for him to develop his own resources. Of course." Victoria agreed, her smile never once wavering. Independence is so important, although it can be quite challenging when family members hold such different perspectives on what success means. When Victoria turned slightly to look back at Andrew, I made a split-second decision that would end up saving my life. Taking advantage of the brief moment her attention was diverted, I quickly swapped our mugs. They were identical white porcelain cups, and the switch took less than 2 seconds. "Andrew has told me so much about his latest venture," I said, testing the waters to see exactly how much Victoria knew about her husband's mysterious business partner. "It sounds extremely promising." Something flashed in Victoria's eyes. It was surprise, perhaps, or maybe annoyance. "Yes, he is very excited about the potential." And his partner. Andrew mentioned someone from California with a strong background in tech. Victoria murmured non-committally, raising her cup, which was now my original cup, directly to her lips. "Innovation is just so important in today's market, do you not think?" We chatted aimlessly about trivial things while I pretended to sip my coffee. I watched intently as Victoria took her first real swallow. Her face twisted slightly as if she were tasting something foul, and I saw her eyes widen with what looked like genuine confusion. But she did not say a single word about the taste, which was incredibly revealing. "This is absolutely delicious," I lied, setting my mug down after another fake sip. "You will have to tell me exactly where you found this blend." "That little shop down on Elm Street," Victoria said absent-mindedly. I could practically see her mind working overtime trying to process something that made no logical sense to her. Andrew was checking his watch with increasing frequency. There was a thick tension in the room that felt exactly like a massive storm gathering on the horizon. Whatever they had come here to accomplish, it was definitely not going according to plan. 20 minutes later, Victoria started to cough. It began as a small, polite clearing of her throat, but it rapidly escalated into deep, violent spasms that shook her entire body. Her face flushed a bright red, and then it began to take on a sickly grayish pallor that made her look genuinely ill. "Something is wrong," she gasped, gripping the edge of the kitchen table tightly as the coughing only grew worse. Her voice was becoming incredibly hoarse and strained. I cannot breathe right." Andrew rushed over from his spot by the door. His concern appeared totally genuine, or at least it was a very good act. "Victoria, what is going on? Are you having an allergic reaction?" "Hospital," she wheezed. Her breathing was becoming more and more labored by the second. "I need to go to the hospital right now." As we frantically rushed to get ready for the emergency room, Victoria leaned heavily on Andrew while making appropriately distressed noises. One single thought kept repeating over and over in my mind. That coffee was meant for me. My dear daughter-in-law had just poisoned herself with her very own murder weapon. The irony was so absolutely perfect that it almost made me smile. The drive to Mercy General Hospital was incredibly tense. Victoria sat in the passenger seat of Andrew's BMW, making increasingly dramatic sounds of pure agony. I sat quietly in the back seat. I looked externally worried, but internally I was analyzing every single detail of what had just happened. Victoria's symptoms were completely consistent with cyanide poisoning. The severe respiratory distress, the burning sensation she kept complaining about, the blotchy skin. The strong smell of almonds in the coffee had already confirmed my suspicions. Someone had really done their homework on fast-acting poisons that are hard to detect without highly specific tests. If I had actually taken the full dose intended for my body weight, I would probably be dead right now, instead of sitting here watching this whole performance unfold. "How are you feeling, sweetheart?" Andrew asked for the third time in 10 minutes. His voice was perfectly modulated right between deep concern and sheer panic. "Just hold on, we are almost there." "It burns," Victoria managed to gasp out between violent coughing fits. "My throat is burning." I leaned slightly forward from the back seat. "Victoria, are you severely allergic to something in the coffee? The milk, perhaps, or some kind of flavoring?" She shook her head violently, then locked eyes with me in the rearview mirror. Even through all her apparent suffering, I caught a quick flash of cold calculation that chilled me to the bone. The emergency room at Mercy General Hospital was a state of controlled chaos. It had the usual mix of genuine medical emergencies and worried parents dragging sick kids around. Victoria's condition was dramatic enough to warrant immediate attention. Her heavy coughing and desperate gasps for air were certainly very convincing. "We need help over here," Andrew yelled as we burst through the doors. He supported his wife, who was now making choking noises that would have been truly alarming if they were not timed so perfectly. "My wife cannot breathe." The medical team responded with impressive efficiency. Within minutes, Victoria was on a gurney hooked up to a dozen monitors and surrounded by nurses taking her vitals and asking rapid-fire questions. "When exactly did these symptoms start?" asked Dr. Eliza Washington. She was a highly competent-looking woman with short hair and a completely no-nonsense attitude. "About 30 minutes ago," Andrew replied, playing the role of the frantic husband to absolute perfection. "She was perfectly fine this morning. Then suddenly she just started coughing and having severe trouble breathing right after we had some coffee over at my mother's house. Any known allergies? Current medications? Any recent changes in her diet or environment?" "Nothing at all," Andrew said, shaking his head. "She has always been in perfect health." I watched this entire exchange with growing fascination. Andrew was answering every single question smoothly. He never hesitated. He never seemed uncertain. He was either remarkably calm under pressure, or he had prepared extensively for this exact scenario. Dr. Washington looked over at me. "Are you family?" "I am her mother-in-law," I said smoothly. "We were having coffee together when she suddenly got sick." "Did you drink the exact same coffee, similar?" I said very carefully. "Victoria prepared it. She brought 2 cups from the same batch. And you are feeling all right, completely normal," I confirmed. Dr. Washington made a quick note on her clipboard, and I could practically see the gears turning in her medical mind. One person getting violently ill after consuming the exact same substance usually suggested a severe allergic reaction, or something much more sinister. "Mrs. Bennett," Dr. Washington addressed Victoria directly, "can you tell me exactly what you were doing right before these symptoms started?" "Coffee." Victoria whispered, her voice barely even audible. "Drinking coffee with her." Her eyes found mine straight across the small examination area. The way she said the word "her" carried an unmistakable note of pure accusation, even in her supposedly weakened state. Victoria was already laying the groundwork for what was about to come. Dr. Washington followed Victoria's steady gaze right to me. "Did you prepare the coffee, Mrs. Bennett?" "No, I did not," I said firmly. Victoria brought the coffee over to my house, already prepared in a travel thermos. She poured it into the cups herself. The doctor's expression remained neutral, but I could feel her suspicion shifting slightly. "We are going to run some extensive blood tests," she announced to the room. "In the meantime, we will put her on oxygen and see if we can make her a bit more comfortable." While the medical team worked frantically on Victoria, Andrew pulled me aside. "Mom, I'm going to run home and grab some of her things," he said, still refusing to look me directly in the eye. "Pajamas, toiletries. You know how terrible hospitals can be." "Of course, sweetheart," I said, gently patting his arm. I noted how incredibly eager he was to leave the side of his supposedly critically ill wife. "Take your time." Once Andrew was gone, I settled into an uncomfortable plastic chair out in the waiting room. I was surrounded by the familiar sounds of medical emergencies and human suffering. The magazines were years out of date. The coffee from the vending machine looked absolutely terrible, and the harsh fluorescent lighting made everyone look slightly dead. It was the perfect setting to sit and contemplate an attempted murder. 3 hours later, Andrew returned carrying a small overnight bag. He looked appropriately exhausted and deeply worried. His timing was absolutely impeccable. He walked through the waiting room doors right as Dr. Washington emerged from the treatment area with news. "Mr. Bennett," she said, her expression incredibly serious, "we have completed our initial tests on your wife." "How is she doing?" Andrew asked, his voice cracking very convincingly. "She is stable for now," Dr. Washington said quietly, "but I really need to speak with both of you in private." She led us down the hall into a small consultation room and closed the heavy door before turning to face us. "We found significant traces of cyanide in Mrs. Bennett's bloodstream," Dr. Washington announced with cold clinical precision. "This appears to be a deliberate poisoning. I am required by state law to contact the authorities." "Cyanide," Andrew repeated. His face paled dramatically as he grabbed my arm as if he were seeking support. "Poisoning? Who would do something like that?" Before Dr. Washington could even formulate an answer, a weak voice called out from the doorway. Victoria was standing there, heavily supported by a nurse. She looked incredibly fragile and vulnerable in her hospital gown, but her eyes were razor-sharp and totally focused. "She did it!" Victoria rasped, her index finger pointing straight at me. "Gloria poisoned my coffee. She tried to kill me." The accusation hit the tiny room like a bomb going off. Dr. Washington stared at me with a heavy mix of pure shock and deep suspicion, while Andrew looked as if he had just been slapped across the face. "That is impossible," Andrew stammered, but his voice completely lacked any real conviction. "Mom would never..." She prepared the coffee herself. Victoria continued, her voice growing stronger with every single word. She handed it to me personally. She stood there and watched me drink it. The sheer irony was almost laughable. Here I had inadvertently saved her miserable life by switching our cups, and she was repaying me by trying to frame me for attempted murder. "That is absolutely false," I stated, keeping my voice completely steady. "Victoria brought that coffee to my home in a thermos. She poured it out herself. I barely even touched mine." Dr. Washington looked back and forth between the two of us, clearly trying to figure out who was telling the truth. "The police are going to need formal statements from all of you. They should be arriving shortly." Right on cue, a tall man in a dark suit appeared in the doorway holding up a shiny badge. "Detective Marcus Reynolds, Homicide Division. I need to speak with everyone involved in this incident." Detective Reynolds was much younger than I expected for someone handling attempted murder cases. He was maybe in his early 40s with sharp eyes that missed absolutely nothing and the patient demeanor of a man who had heard every lie imaginable. "Mrs. Bennett," he said, nodding respectfully in my direction, "I would like to start with you, in private if you do not mind." As I followed Detective Reynolds into another small consultation room, I locked eyes with Victoria one last time. Despite her weakened state, there was a triumphant gleam in her eyes that sent a shiver straight down my spine. She actually thought she had won. She had absolutely no idea who she was dealing with. The tiny room Detective Reynolds led me into was sterile and windowless. It was practically designed for delivering bad news and having uncomfortable conversations. He motioned for me to sit down, then took the chair directly opposite mine. "I want to be perfectly clear. Right from the start, Mrs. Bennett..." Detective Reynolds began flipping open his notepad. "You are not under arrest, and you are free to leave at any time. But I really need to understand exactly what happened here today." I took a deep breath and looked directly into his eyes. "My son and my daughter-in-law came over to my house this morning without any warning. Victoria brought coffee that she claimed was from a little shop downtown. She had already poured it into cups, and when she offered one to me, I noticed a very unusual smell. It smelled like almonds, which I recognized from my days as a prosecutor as a strong indicator of cyanide." Detective Reynolds raised an eyebrow. "You were a prosecutor." "For 30 years, I confirmed. I handled several complex poisoning cases. That is exactly why I recognized the smell." "And what did you do when you noticed this smell?" Here was the truly tricky part. I needed to be honest without sounding too cold or calculating. "When Victoria was not looking, I swapped our cups. I was not absolutely sure the coffee was poisoned. It seemed almost too strange to even consider, but something just felt off, and I have learned to trust my instincts." "So you deliberately gave Mrs. Bennett a cup that you suspected might contain poison?" "I was not certain it was poisoned," I clarified. "I thought it might be, and switching the cups was a simple way to test my theory without causing a massive scene if I turned out to be wrong. Once Victoria started showing symptoms, I knew my gut feeling had been right." Detective Reynolds jotted down some notes. His expression revealed absolutely nothing. "Why would your daughter-in-law want to poison you, Mrs. Bennett?" I hesitated for a moment. I was weighing exactly how much to reveal about Andrew's recent visit and his aggressive demands for cash. I did not want to implicate my own son without being completely sure of his involvement, but I really needed to provide some context. "My son Andrew asked me for a very large sum of money just 2 days ago. He wanted $100,000 for a new business venture. I refused. He was unusually angry about it." "Do you believe your son was involved in this poisoning attempt?" The question hung heavily in the air between us. Was I really ready to accuse my own flesh and blood of attempted murder? "I do not know," I finally said. "I would really like to believe that he was not, but his behavior has been deeply concerning lately." Detective Reynolds nodded slowly. "We are going to need to search your home for any potential evidence. Are you willing to consent to that, Mrs. Bennett?" "Of course," I replied. "I have absolutely nothing to hide." While Detective Reynolds continued to question me about the events of the morning, I could clearly hear Victoria's voice right through the thin drywall. She was weaving a highly convincing tale of victimhood that made me sound like a jealous, controlling mother-in-law who deeply resented her son's beautiful wife. "Gloria has always been so cold to me," Victoria was saying, her voice echoing down the hall. "She does not think I am good enough for Andrew. She does not believe I deserve to be part of the Bennett family." "Has she ever threatened you before?" asked Detective Reynolds' partner. "Not directly," Victoria replied smoothly, "but there have been comments. Things about how she controls all the family money and how people should not get too comfortable in their positions." Every single word was a knife carefully planted right in my back. Victoria was painting a vivid portrait of a bitter, controlling old woman who might just poison her daughter-in-law out of pure jealousy and a desperate fear of losing control. It was an absolutely brilliant character assassination, and judging by the soft murmurs of sympathy I could hear through the wall, it was working perfectly. When Detective Reynolds finally finished with me and moved on to interview Andrew, I was left all alone in the small consultation room. I felt like the walls were closing in on me. I really needed to think strategically. Victoria and Andrew had clearly planned this whole thing out very carefully, but they had made one crucial mistake. They had completely underestimated me. I had spent 3 decades locking up arrogant criminals who thought they were smarter than the justice system. I knew exactly how to build a rock-solid case, and more importantly, I knew exactly how to tear one apart. If my own son and his wife wanted to play this dangerous game, they were about to learn that they had picked the absolute worst opponent. Walking out of the consultation room, I passed Andrew in the hallway. For a brief second, our eyes met. I saw something in his gaze that completely broke my heart. It was not remorse. It was not shame. It was pure, cold calculation. My son was evaluating just how well his twisted plan was working. He was measuring my reaction against what they had originally anticipated. In that exact moment, the terrible truth finally dawned on me. The sweet boy I had raised, the child I had loved more than anything else in this world, was totally willing to see me locked in a prison cell or buried in the ground, all for the sake of money. The sheer pain of that betrayal was unlike anything I had ever experienced before, but I forced it down deep. I locked it away where it could not weaken my resolve. I would cry later. Right now, I needed to fight back. Welcome back to my story. I am completely overwhelmed by your comments and all the support coming in from all over the country. A lot of you asked what you would do if your own child betrayed you like this. Well, let me show you exactly how I fought back when the walls started closing in around me. Detective Marcus Reynolds stood right in the middle of my kitchen, supervising closely as his forensics team moved methodically through my home. I sat quietly at the kitchen table, sipping a cup of tea. I watched these strangers in latex gloves thoroughly examine every single surface where Victoria claimed I had prepared her poisoned coffee. "We really appreciate your cooperation, Mrs. Bennett," Detective Reynolds said. His tone was professional but extremely cautious. "This will only take a few hours." I nodded. My prosecutor's mind was already cataloging every single thing they were doing. I tracked what they touched, what they photographed, and what they bagged up as evidence. I knew this little dance very well. I had choreographed it myself hundreds of times from the other side of the yellow tape. The only difference was that those cases had actually involved guilty people. I was completely innocent. "Detective," I said very carefully, "I would really like to understand exactly what Mrs. Bennett is claiming." Reynolds studied me for a long moment. "She claims that you brewed the coffee right here in this kitchen. She says you handed her a very specific mug and then stood there watching her as she drank it. She also claims that you barely even touched your own cup. I almost laughed out loud at the bitter irony. That is exactly what happened, except she was the one who brought and prepared the coffee, not me. And yet, only she got sick, Reynolds observed dryly. Because I swapped the cups when she was not looking, I reminded him. I suspected there was something wrong with the coffee she handed me. That is quite a massive leap, Mrs. Bennet. Suspecting that your own daughter-in-law was actively trying to poison you. I held his gaze without blinking. In my 30 years as a prosecutor, I learned to always trust my instincts. Something felt totally wrong from the exact moment they arrived. Their timing, their strange behavior, and most importantly, the highly distinct smell of almonds wafting from that coffee. "Hey, boss," one of the technicians called out from across the kitchen. "Can you show us exactly where you keep your coffee supplies?" I led them over to the walk-in pantry where Martha stored our various coffee beans, filters, and accessories. Everything looked perfectly normal to me, but the technicians treated every single item like potential murder evidence. They carefully bagged and tagged anything that could have possibly come into contact with poison. "What about cleaning supplies?" asked Detective Reynolds. "Anything at all that might contain strong chemical compounds." I walked them down to the utility room where we kept the usual household chemicals. We had bleach ammonia, heavy-duty drain cleaners, and various other toxic substances that could be found in almost any normal American home. Once again, they photographed everything and took multiple swabs. 2 hours into the agonizing search, I heard one of the technicians yell from the upstairs guest bathroom, "Detective Reynolds, you really need to see this." The obvious excitement in his voice made my stomach clench tight. I followed Detective Reynolds up the stairs, dreading whatever they might have just found. In the guest bathroom, a room I rarely ever used and had not stepped foot inside for several weeks. They discovered a small glass vial hidden right behind the medicine cabinet. The tiny vial contained trace amounts of a clear liquid. Right next to it was a handwritten list that clearly included Victoria's name, along with what looked exactly like lethal dosage calculations. "Mrs. Bennet," Detective Reynolds said sternly, holding up a clear evidence bag that contained both the vial and the list. "Can you explain these items?" I stared at the evidence, feeling the entire world start to tilt around me. The handwriting on the list looked remarkably like my own. Even though I had zero memory of ever writing such a thing, the vial itself was completely unfamiliar to me. "I have never seen either of those items before in my life," I said. My voice sounded very strange and distant even to my own ears. "This is your handwriting, is it not?" Reynolds insisted, holding the list much closer to my face. Looking at it carefully, I had to admit that it looked exactly like my handwriting. The formation of the letters, the highly particular way I crossed my T's and dotted my I's. Whoever had written this note had either studied my writing extensively, or they were an incredibly skilled forger. "It certainly appears to be my handwriting," I admitted slowly. "But I did not write this. Someone is framing me." "That is a pretty heavy accusation, Mrs. Bennet. Who exactly would want to frame you?" The answer was painfully obvious, but saying it out loud felt like ripping my own heart right out of my chest. "My son and his wife came to me 2 days ago begging for $100,000. I flat out refused. Today they brought poisoned coffee into my home, which Victoria accidentally drank when I swapped our mugs. And while we were stuck at the hospital this morning, Andrew left for several hours. He claimed he needed to pack up some of Victoria's belongings." I took a deep, shaky breath before delivering the most painful part. He would have had full access to my home during that entire time. Reynolds's eyebrows shot up. "Are you seriously suggesting that your own son planted this evidence?" The words sounded completely insane even as I said them, but I simply could not ignore the obvious timeline. I am saying that someone with free access to my house and intimate knowledge of my handwriting could have easily placed these items here while we were at the hospital. Detective Reynolds studied me very carefully. Mrs. Bennet, that is a very serious accusation to make against your own flesh and blood. It is not an accusation, I replied evenly. It is a factual observation about opportunity and access. But even as I said the words, I could see the heavy doubt swimming in Reynolds' eyes, the grieving mother caught red-handed with hard evidence of an attempted murder, desperately trying to pin the blame on her innocent son. It was exactly the type of wild deflection that guilty people always tried when they were finally cornered. "We will be taking these items in for lab analysis," Reynolds said, sealing up the plastic evidence bags, "along with several samples of your handwriting for comparison." "Of course." Reynolds paused for a moment, then asked, "Mrs. Bennet, do you own any firearms?" The random question took me completely by surprise. "Yes, I keep a handgun locked in the safe inside my bedroom." "Why do you ask?" "We will need to examine that as well." I led them into my master bedroom and opened the heavy steel safe. It revealed a .38 caliber revolver that Richard had always insisted I keep for protection right after he received several death threats during a particularly nasty business deal. The gun was sitting exactly where I had left it, and I could not even fathom how it related to a poisoning case. "Has this weapon been fired recently?" Reynolds asked. "Not in over a year. I occasionally go down to the shooting range just for practice, but I have not been there in many months." They bagged the gun anyway, right along with the box of ammunition from the safe. I was starting to understand that in a real criminal investigation, absolutely everything was potentially relevant until proven otherwise. When the search team finally finished their work, Detective Reynolds pulled me aside for one last conversation. "Mrs. Bennet, based on everything we have found here today, I need to officially inform you that you are now considered a prime person of interest in this case. I strongly recommend that you contact an attorney immediately." "Am I under arrest?" I asked. My voice sounded a lot steadier than I actually felt. "Not at this exact moment, but I highly advise you not to leave the city limits without notifying my office first." After the police finally left, I walked through my quiet house, seeing it with completely new eyes. Rooms that had been photographed and thoroughly searched, surfaces that had been dusted for fingerprints, personal possessions that had been scrutinized for any shred of criminal intent. My peaceful sanctuary had been completely violated, and I felt like a stranger standing in my own home. But much more than that, I felt the crushing weight of betrayal settling over my shoulders like a heavy lead blanket. Someone had planned this whole thing out with terrifying precision. They had planted hard evidence pointing directly at me while crafting the perfect cover story. And the only two people who had the opportunity, the free access, and the intimate knowledge to pull it off were my very own son and his wife. That night, I sat alone in my study with a glass of wine, staring out at the oil wells visible right through my window. The mechanical pumps just continued their steady rhythm, pulling vast wealth straight out of the earth, exactly as they had done for 3 generations. But for the very first time since I inherited this massive empire, I genuinely wondered if it would all just die with me. Andrew had not just tried to rob me blind. He and Victoria had actively tried to murder me and frame me for attempted murder. The sheer complexity and ruthless cruelty of their plan left me completely breathless. But they had made one crucial mistake. They had underestimated me. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I had not used in 5 years. "Jonathan Hayes speaking." "Jonathan, it is Gloria. I really need your help. Someone is trying to completely destroy me, and I think it might be my own son." Jonathan Hayes arrived at my estate in exactly 1 hour. He looked very much like he did back during our days as prosecutors. He had neatly styled silver hair, sharp eyes that missed absolutely nothing, and the purposeful stride of a man who never wasted a single second of time or motion. "Gloria," he said softly, giving me a brief hug right in the foyer. "I got here as soon as I could." I led him straight into my study and poured a strong whiskey for both of us. It was his drink of choice during our late-night case preparations many years ago. As we settled into the heavy leather armchairs, I felt a strange sense of comfort in the total familiarity of the situation. Jonathan and I had tackled seemingly impossible cases together for decades. This was going to be our final case. "Tell me absolutely everything," he said, taking a slow sip of his whiskey. "Do not leave out a single detail." I relayed the entire sequence of wild events. I told him about Andrew's desperate demand for cash, Victoria's special coffee delivery, the highly convenient evidence planted inside my bathroom, and Andrew's calculated betrayal during the police interviews. Jonathan listened without interrupting once. His expression just grew darker with every new detail. "Jesus, Gloria," he muttered when I finally finished. "If Andrew and Victoria are really behind this, we are dealing with attempted murder and heavy conspiracy charges. This is not just about money anymore." "I know that. The real question is how we actually prove it. First things first, you need top-tier criminal representation immediately. I am going to call Samuel Montgomery. He is the absolute best defense attorney in the entire state, and he owes me a massive favor from the Anderson case." I nodded. I felt incredibly relieved. Samuel Montgomery was an absolute legend in legal circles. He was ruthless, brilliant, and completely dedicated to his clients. If anyone could help me navigate this waking nightmare, it would be him. "Jonathan, there is something else," I said, lowering my voice even though we were completely alone in the big house. "I genuinely believe Andrew might be in some very serious trouble with dangerous people. The aggressive way he demanded that money, the pure desperation in his voice. This feels like way more than just another failed business venture." "What kind of trouble?" "I do not know yet, but I really want to find out. If Andrew is mixed up with criminals, it might explain exactly why he is willing to go this far." Jonathan stayed completely silent for a moment, and I could practically hear the gears turning in his head. "I still have plenty of contacts in law enforcement. Let me make a few discreet inquiries into Andrew's recent activities. But in the meantime, you need to assume that you are under heavy surveillance. Everything you do, everywhere you go, every single person you talk to. The police are going to be watching closely." "I understand. And please be extremely careful around Andrew and Victoria. If they were willing to commit murder, once they will not hesitate to try it again." His words sent a violent shiver right down my spine. My own son might still be actively trying to kill me. It seemed totally impossible, like something straight out of a horrible nightmare that I could not wake up from. How did I not see this coming? I asked, my voice cracking slightly. How did I fail to see what my own son was turning into? Jonathan's tough expression softened considerably. "Do not do that to yourself, Gloria. You could not possibly have known. Andrew fooled absolutely everyone, including me, and I am highly trained to spot liars. But I am his mother. I really should have known. You saw exactly what he wanted you to see. That is exactly what good manipulators do. They show you the face you desperately want to see while completely hiding their true intentions." Samuel Montgomery arrived at my estate later that evening. He carried a sleek briefcase and wore the kind of dead serious expression that defense attorneys used when their clients were in deep trouble. He was much younger than I had expected. He was maybe in his early 50s, but Jonathan had assured me that his relative youth was easily offset by his sheer brilliance and his total lack of boundaries when it came to protecting his clients. "Mrs. Bennett," Samuel said, settling into my study as if he owned the place, "Jonathan has fully briefed me on your dire situation. You are in significant legal jeopardy right now, but the case against you actually has some very interesting weaknesses. Like what? I asked, feeling a tiny glimmer of hope for the very first time. For one thing, the poisoning appears to have been planned well in advance, but you had absolutely no way of knowing that Andrew and Victoria were going to visit you this morning. If you were truly planning to poison your daughter-in-law, you would need prior notice of her arrival. Unless the prosecution argues that I was actually planning to poison Andrew and Victoria was just an accidental victim, I pointed out quickly. Samuel nodded with clear approval. Exactly the kind of sharp thinking that made you such a good prosecutor. Yes, they could definitely argue that, but there is another glaring problem with their case. The motive. Why would you ever want to kill Andrew? He is your son and your sole heir. His sudden death would significantly complicate your estate planning. I thought about what Jonathan had told me regarding looking into Andrew's background. I thought about the strong possibility of hidden debts or violent threats, but I decided to keep that sensitive information to myself for now. What about Victoria? Could they argue that I wanted to eliminate her just to protect Andrew's future inheritance? Possibly, but that is an incredibly weak motive for murder. Wealthy families deal with gold-digging spouses through ironclad prenuptial agreements and trust funds. They do not use poison. Samuel snapped open his briefcase and pulled out a yellow legal pad. Talk to me about the physical evidence they found in your house, the vial and the handwritten list. I described the items in meticulous detail. I emphasized how the handwriting looked exactly like mine, but I had absolutely zero memory of ever creating that list. That planted evidence is actually our strongest defense, Samuel stated firmly. It is almost way too convenient. Real poisoners do not usually leave behind signed confessions with their victim's name and exact dosage calculations right next to the weapon. So what is our next move? We need to investigate Andrew and Victoria completely independently. If they are running some kind of long con, there will be hard evidence. Financial records, strange communication patterns, possibly even previous victims. Previous victims, I repeated, totally confused. Samuel leaned back in his leather chair, studying me very carefully. If your son is truly willing to murder his own mother for inheritance money, this is probably not his first rodeo. People do not usually jump straight into matricide without working their way up through lesser crimes first. That chilling thought sent pure ice straight through my veins. Do you really think they have done this before? I think we desperately need to find out. Jonathan is already running deep background checks on both of them. If there are any massive red flags in their past, we will find them. That night, I barely slept at all. Every tiny sound in the massive house made me jump. Every single shadow looked incredibly threatening. I had installed a state-of-the-art security system years ago, but knowing that my own son had the keys and the access codes made it feel completely useless. Around 1 a.m, I heard a car pull into my driveway. Peeking from my bedroom window, I could clearly see Andrew's BMW parked right near the front door. I watched closely as he sat in the driver's seat for several minutes. He was making frantic phone calls and looking highly agitated. Finally, he got out and approached the house. Instead of using his key, he knocked very softly on the front door. When I did not answer, he tried the heavy brass handle and found it locked solid. He slowly walked around the perimeter of the entire house, testing the ground floor windows and actively searching for other points of entry. This was not the normal behavior of a worried son checking on his elderly mother. It was pure reconnaissance. After 20 minutes, Andrew finally gave up and drove away into the night. I immediately called Samuel. He was casing the house, I told him. My heart was still racing out of control. He was looking for ways to break in without using his key. Did you manage to record any of this? The exterior security cameras should have caught absolutely everything. Perfect. Do not touch those recordings at all. We are going to need them if this thing goes to trial. I hung up the phone, physically trembling. My own son had just spent 20 minutes looking for a way to break into my home in the dead of night. Whatever was driving him, whether it was money-blind fear or something completely different, had pushed him way past the point of reason. It pushed him past the point of basic humanity. For the very first time, I truly understood that my sweet boy was gone. He had been fully replaced by someone capable of cold-blooded murder, someone I did not know at all. The next morning brought even more terrible news. Detective Reynolds called to inform me that the preliminary forensic results had officially confirmed my fingerprints were right on the poison vial. He also said the handwriting analysis was entirely consistent with my writing samples. "Mrs. Bennett," Detective Reynolds said firmly, "I need you to come down to the station for some additional questioning. You have the right to have your attorney present." "We will be there this afternoon," I told him. And then I immediately called Samuel. "They are moving much faster than I expected," Samuel said. The deep concern in his voice was very evident. "This feels exactly like they are gearing up for a formal arrest. We need to accelerate our own investigation right now." That afternoon, as Samuel and I sat together in the sterile waiting room of the police station, I felt the walls closing in all around me. The evidence against me was entirely circumstantial, but it was highly convincing. I had the means, access to deadly poison. I had the opportunity, preparing the coffee, and supposedly I had a clear motive, protecting the massive family wealth. The planted evidence provided the ultimate smoking gun that would easily convince any jury of my guilt. "Mrs. Bennett," Detective Reynolds said when we were finally called into the interrogation room, "we have received some additional forensic results that I believe you really should know about." Samuel leaned slightly forward in his chair. "What kind of results?" "The poison found in your daughter-in-law's bloodstream is an exact chemical match to the substance inside the vial recovered from your bathroom. We also found trace amounts of the exact same substance in a coffee mug, sitting right in your kitchen sink." My heart completely sank. They had found hard physical evidence linking me directly to the violent crime. Even if I could somehow prove that the evidence was meticulously planted, it would be incredibly difficult to convince a jury that someone had gone to such insane lengths just to frame me. "Detective Reynolds," Samuel said very smoothly, "my client maintains her absolute innocence. This evidence is clearly the direct result of cross-contamination or deliberate tampering." By whom? By the true perpetrator who had full unrestricted access to Mrs. Bennett's home while she was stuck at the hospital. Detective Reynolds looked highly skeptical. "Are you seriously suggesting that someone else poisoned Victoria and then broke into Mrs. Bennett's house just to plant fake evidence?" "I am suggesting that the timeline and the bizarre circumstances do not support the conclusion that my client is guilty of this horrific crime." But I could clearly see in Detective Reynolds' eyes that he had already made up his mind. To him, I was just a wealthy, bitter old woman who had tried to murder her daughter-in-law, and now I was desperately trying to pin the blame on my innocent son. "Mrs. Bennett," Detective Reynolds said firmly, "based on the physical evidence we have gathered, I am officially arresting you for attempted murder." As the cold steel handcuffs clicked shut around my wrists, I looked over at Samuel and saw my very own fears reflected right in his eyes. Andrew and Victoria had played this game perfectly, and I was about to pay the ultimate price for underestimating my own flesh and blood. But as they led me out toward the waiting squad car, one single thought kept me from falling completely into despair. They had made one incredibly crucial mistake. They had left me alive, and as long as I was still breathing, I was not done fighting back. The county jail was absolutely everything I had expected, and much worse. It had gray concrete walls, harsh fluorescent lighting that made everyone look like a walking corpse, and the constant echoing sound of heavy metal doors slamming shut. I had sent more than enough criminals to places exactly like this during my long career, but experiencing it firsthand was profoundly different. My cellmate was a tough-looking woman named Mary Davis. She had been arrested for wire fraud and was surprisingly philosophical about the whole experience. "First time in here?" she asked as I tried to get somewhat comfortable on the narrow, rock-hard bunk. "Unfortunately, yes." "What did they nab you for?" "They think I tried to poison my daughter-in-law." Mary let out a low whistle. "Family drama. That is always the messiest kind of crime." "I did not do it." "Honey, nobody in here did it, but the real question is, can you prove you didn't?" That was exactly the question keeping me awake at night. Samuel had warned me that proving innocence was much harder than establishing reasonable doubt, especially when the evidence was as seemingly solid as what they had gathered against me. The bail hearing was scheduled for Monday morning, 3 days later. Samuel was confident he could secure my release, but the prosecution argued that I was a flight risk due to my substantial wealth and that I posed a danger to potential witnesses. "The district attorney is treating this as a high-profile case," Samuel explained during one of his visits. "They think convicting a wealthy oil heiress will be good publicity." "What about our investigation into Andrew and Victoria?" "Jonathan is making progress, but it is going slowly. We have confirmed that Andrew has significant gambling debts, over $300,000 with some very unsavory people. That gives him a clear motive for needing cash fast." $300,000. The figure left me stunned. How did he rack up that kind of debt? High-stakes poker games, sports betting, some kind of cryptocurrency speculation that went wrong. The point is, he was desperate enough to do something drastic. "What about Victoria?" Samuel's expression darkened. "That is where it gets interesting. Victoria Bennett does not exist." I felt my pulse race. "What do you mean?" "The identity is fake, created about 4 years ago with forged documents and a fabricated background. Jonathan tracked her real identity to a woman named Naomi Jackson who has a criminal record in 3 states. What kind of record? Identity theft, fraud, and get this, suspected involvement in the suspicious death of an elderly man in Arizona. The case was never prosecuted due to a lack of evidence, but the pattern is clear." Suddenly, everything made sense. Andrew had not just married a beautiful woman, he had married a professional criminal who specialized in exactly the kind of scheme they tried to run on me. So this was planned from the very beginning. It looks like it. Naomi probably targeted Andrew for his family wealth and then manipulated him to help her gain access to you. But why try to kill me? Why not just wait for me to die naturally and inherit everything? Samuel pulled a folder from his briefcase. "Because Andrew is no longer your heir." I looked at him in confusion. "What are you talking about?" "Jonathan looked into your estate planning. 3 months ago, you updated your will to establish a charitable foundation instead of leaving everything to Andrew. If you died today, Andrew would inherit nothing." The memory flooded back to me. I had been worried about Andrew's spending habits and his string of failed business ventures. My estate lawyer had suggested setting up a foundation that would provide Andrew with a comfortable income while ensuring the bulk of the Bennett fortune went to charitable causes. "Andrew knows about the change to the will," Samuel continued. "Your lawyer's office confirmed that Andrew called asking about your estate plans about 6 weeks ago. So he knew that killing me would not get him the inheritance." "Correct. But if you were convicted of trying to murder Victoria, the will could be contested on the grounds of mental incompetence or criminal behavior. Andrew could argue that you were not in your right mind when you changed the will." The sheer complexity of their plan was staggering. They had not just tried to kill me, they had tried to destroy my reputation and mental competency, so Andrew could inherit my fortune even after I had specifically disinherited him. "There is more," Samuel said. "We found evidence that Andrew has been taking out loans against his expected inheritance. He owes money to several legitimate lenders and some very illegitimate ones. If he does not inherit your estate, he is not just broke, he is in physical danger from the people he owes money to." That explains the desperation. I said softly, thinking of the wild look in Andrew's eyes when I turned down his request for money. These are not the kind of creditors who accept payment plans. Exactly. I spent that night staring at the ceiling of my cell, processing the full scope of Andrew and Naomi's betrayal. My son had not just been greedy, he had been desperate, and desperate people were capable of anything. But knowledge was power, and now I had the ammunition I needed to fight back. "Mary," I said to my cellmate around 2 a.m, "what do you know about getting back at people who try to destroy your life?" She rolled over and looked at me with newfound interest. "Honey, that depends on how far you are willing to go and how much money you have to spend. I have more money than I know what to do with, and after what they have put me through, I am willing to go pretty far." Mary smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. "In that case, you and I need to have a very interesting conversation." Mary turned out to be a treasure trove of information on how the criminal underworld operated as a specialist in check fraud. She had worked with various criminal enterprises and understood their structures and motivations. "Your son owes money to loan sharks, right?" she asked. "Those guys do not play around. First they will break your legs, then they will move on to more valuable body parts." "Can we use that somehow?" Mary tapped her chin thoughtfully. "Maybe, but you need to be careful. These people do not have rules like we do. If you start playing in their sandbox, you might end up buried in it." She paused, then added, "But there is a guy, Eddie Reynolds, he specializes in information. If you can get a message to him on the outside, you might be able to find out exactly who your son owes and how deep in he is." I filed the name away, planning to pass it on to Jonathan as soon as possible. The bail hearing was an absolute media circus. News vans lined the street outside the courthouse, and reporters shouted questions as Samuel escorted me through the crowd. "Oil heiress accused of poisoning daughter-in-law" was the headline on all the local news stations, and I could see the story spreading to national outlets. Andrew and Victoria were in the courtroom sitting in the front row with their lawyer. Victoria looked appropriately fragile and victimized, while Andrew played the role of the devastated son torn between loyalty to his mother and justice for his wife. Judge Patricia Williams presided over the hearing with the no-nonsense efficiency I remembered from my days as a prosecutor. She listened to the arguments from both sides, reviewed the evidence, and set bail at $2 million. High enough to make a statement, but not so high as to be punitive. "The defendant will surrender her passport and submit to electronic monitoring," Judge Williams announced. "She is to have no contact with the alleged victim or any witnesses in this case." As I was being processed for release, Samuel pulled me aside with urgent news. "The FBI is getting involved," he said quietly. Jonathan's intel on Naomi Jackson caught their attention. They have been tracking her for years, but she always managed to stay one step ahead. This might be their chance to finally nail her. A spark of hope flared in my chest. If the FBI was investigating Naomi, they might uncover evidence that would clear my name. What does this mean for my case? It is complicated. The local charges will not disappear immediately, but if the FBI can prove Naomi has a pattern of similar crimes, it considerably strengthens our defense. As I walked out of the courthouse with an electronic monitoring ankle bracelet, I saw Andrew watching me from across the parking lot. Our eyes met briefly, and in that moment I saw something I had not expected. Fear. He was afraid of me. Good, he should be. Welcome back to the channel, and thank you all for your incredible comments and support. Many of you shared stories of betrayal that absolutely broke my heart. Others asked what I would do next with the evidence we had uncovered. Well, here is the final chapter of my story. How I fought back against the people who tried to take everything from me. That night, I sat in my study with an electronic monitor strapped to my ankle, feeling like a prisoner in my own home. The media attention had been overwhelming. Reporters were camping outside my gates, news choppers were flying overhead, and there was a constant stream of phone calls from journalists wanting my side of the story. I turned down all interviews, but I watched the coverage with growing anger. Andrew was giving carefully orchestrated statements to sympathetic reporters, presenting himself as the tragic son of a mentally unstable mother who had finally cracked under the pressure of age and wealth. My mother has been increasingly paranoid over the last year. Andrew told Channel 5 News his expression a perfect mask of concern. She has made accusations against several family members and friends, claiming they are after her money. I believe the stress of managing such a massive estate has severely affected her judgment. It was a masterful performance designed to support the prosecution's theory that I was suffering from age-related mental decline that had led to irrational and violent behavior. But Andrew had made one crucial mistake. In his eagerness to get on television, he had revealed that he and Victoria were still in the area. The interview had been conducted at a local hotel, which meant they had not run as far as we thought. I called Samuel immediately. "Did you see Andrew's interview?" "I saw it. Jonathan is already working with the FBI to track their location." "Samuel, I want to end this. All of it. I am tired of being reactive. It is time to go on the offensive." "What do you have in mind?" "I have been thinking about this since my conversation with Mary in jail. I want to set a trap, use myself as bait to draw them out into the open." "Gloria, that is incredibly dangerous. If Naomi Jackson is willing to commit murder, she will not hesitate to try it again." "That is exactly what I am counting on." The plan I described to Samuel was elegant in its simplicity. We would leak information suggesting I had hidden evidence that could clear my name. Documents or recordings proving that Andrew and Victoria had framed me. The bait would be irresistible to them, because as long as that evidence existed, they would never be safe. "They will have to come for me," I explained, "either to steal the evidence or to silence me before I can use it, and when they do, the FBI will be waiting." Samuel was quiet for a long moment. "This is either brilliant or suicidal. I am not sure which. After what they have put me through, I am not sure I care." Jonathan arrived at my house later that evening, bringing with him Special Agent Diana Chen from the FBI. "Mrs. Bennett," Agent Chen said, shaking my hand firmly, "I have been tracking Naomi Jackson for 3 years. She is elusive and extremely dangerous." "Tell me everything you know about her," I said, leading them into my study. Agent Chen opened a folder on my desk, spreading out photographs of a woman I recognized as Victoria, but with different hair colors, styles, and even subtle alterations to her appearance in each picture. Naomi Jackson, born Naomi Williams in Chicago, 1988. She started with identity theft and credit card fraud in her teens. Then she graduated to more sophisticated scams. Over the last decade, she has specialized in what we call inheritance fraud, targeting wealthy individuals through their heirs. She pointed to a photograph of an older man. Harold Donovan, 78 years old, Phoenix, Arizona. Naomi married his son, Robert, and 6 months later, Harold died of apparent heart failure. Toxicology initially showed nothing suspicious, but when we exhumed the body 2 years later, we found traces of a sophisticated poison that mimics the symptoms of a heart attack. By then, Robert and Naomi had vanished with approximately $3,200,000, Jonathan added. Agent Chen nodded. "We have identified at least 7 similar cases across multiple states. Her pattern is consistent. She finds a wealthy family, seduces the heir, isolates them from other family members, then eliminates the primary wealth holder." "But there is something different about this case," I pointed out. "In the others, she married the son and then killed the father. Here she tried to kill me, but presented herself as the victim." "That is because of the change to your will," Jonathan explained. "When you cut Andrew out of your inheritance, they had to adapt their strategy. And there is something else unusual," Agent Chen added. "In previous cases, Naomi abandoned her husbands after securing the money, usually leaving them to take the fall for any suspicious activity. But she has stayed with your son for almost 4 years. "Why?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. "Your fortune is significantly larger than her previous targets," Agent Chen said. And the oil business provides ongoing revenue, not just a one-time payout. She is playing the long game with you. The thought of this woman manipulating my son for years made my blood boil. Has Andrew been an accomplice in her previous crimes? Agent Chen and Jonathan exchanged glances. We do not know for sure, Jonathan said carefully. But given the evidence we have uncovered about his gambling debts and financial dealings, it is likely he has been aware of her activities for some time. I leaned back in my chair, absorbing this information. My son was not just caught in a criminal's web, he was an active participant in her schemes. What about the poisoning? I asked. How did they get the cyanide? That is where it gets interesting, Agent Chen said. We traced a purchase of sodium cyanide to a chemical supply company in Houston 3 weeks ago. The buyer used a fake ID, but the security footage clearly shows Naomi Jackson making the purchase. So we have proof that she bought the poison, I said, feeling a surge of hope. Yes, but it is not enough to completely exonerate you, Agent Chen warned. We still need to establish that she was the one who administered it and planted evidence in your house. Which brings us back to my plan, I said. We need to lure them and force them to incriminate themselves. Agent Chen nodded slowly. Your idea has merit, Mrs. Bennett, but it is extremely risky. Naomi Jackson has killed at least 7 people that we know of. She would not hesitate to make you her 8th victim. I understand the risks, but I am not willing to spend the rest of my life fighting these false charges or hiding from my own son. I want this to end. After 2 hours of discussion, we finalized our plan. The FBI would set up surveillance in and around my house, with agents posing as landscapers and security personnel. They would monitor all access points and have teams ready to intervene at the first sign of danger. Meanwhile, Jonathan would use his media contacts to leak information suggesting that I had discovered evidence proving my innocence. Specifically a recording from my home security system that had caught Andrew planting the vial of poison in my bathroom. The leak needs to be specific enough to be believable, but vague enough that they need to come here to find out exactly what we have. And you are absolutely sure you want to do this? Samuel asked me one last time. I thought of the betrayal in Andrew's eyes, of Victoria's smug expression, as she accused me of poisoning her of the jail cell where I had spent 3 nights because of their lies. I have never been more sure of anything in my life. The leak was carefully orchestrated through Jonathan's media contacts. By the next morning, rumors were circulating that Gloria Bennett had discovered evidence proving her innocence and planned to present it to authorities within 48 hours. The story was vague enough to be credible, but specific enough to create urgency. Breaking news: oil heiress. Bennett claims new evidence will exonerate her. Read the headline on the local news website. The article quoted an anonymous source close to Mrs. Bennett saying that security footage from the Bennett estate would prove evidence had been planted. If Andrew and Victoria thought I had evidence that could expose them, they would have to act quickly. All I had to do was wait for them to come to me. The waiting was the hardest part. For 2 days, I went through the routine of a normal life while wearing a hidden wire, knowing that FBI agents were positioned around my property. Every phone call could be the setup for an ambush. Every visitor could be a potential killer. Samuel had wanted to evacuate me to a safe house, but I had insisted on staying at the estate. If Andrew and Victoria were going to make a move, it would be on familiar ground where they would feel confident, and I would appear vulnerable. During these tense days of waiting, Agent Chen shared more details about Naomi Jackson's background that helped me understand the woman who had almost destroyed my life. She grew up in poverty, Agent Chen explained as we sat in my kitchen, which had been swept for bugs twice that morning. Unknown father, drug-addicted mother who died when Naomi was 14 years old. She spent 4 years in foster care where she was allegedly abused. That explains her behavior, but it does not excuse it, I said. No, it does not. What is fascinating about Naomi is her intelligence. She scored in the genius range on IQ tests administered during her brief stint in juvenile detention. With different opportunities, she could have been a doctor, a lawyer, or a scientist. Instead, she chose to use that intelligence to destroy lives. Agent Chen nodded. People like Naomi see the world differently than we do. To her, other people are just tools or obstacles. Your son was a tool, her access point to your fortune. You were an obstacle to be eliminated. And now I am bait, I said with a grim smile. Carefully protected bait. Agent Chen reminded me, tapping the bulletproof vest I wore under my blouse. On the third day, Jonathan called with new information that made my heart sink even further. Gloria, we have been tracking Andrew's financial dealings, and it is worse than we thought. He did not just take out loans against his expected inheritance, he sold percentages of it. How is that possible? He cannot sell what he does not have. He created a company called Bennett Future Holdings and sold shares to various investors. The company's only asset was the projected value of Andrew's inheritance. That is not just unethical, it is fraud. I said, my prosecutor's mind immediately cataloging the potential charges. Exactly. And some of his investors are very dangerous people. One in particular, James Morozov, is connected to organized crime. He invested $150,000 in exchange for a promised return of $450,000 once you died. I felt sick. So Andrew literally sold my death to a mobster. So it seems. And Morozov is not known for his patience or understanding when investments fail to pay off. The pieces were falling into place now. Andrew's desperate need for cash, his growing agitation, the rushed timeline of the poisoning attempt. It all made sense. He was not just trying to get rich. He was trying to stay alive. Jonathan, we need to find out if Morozov is pressuring Andrew directly. That might explain why they are still in the city instead of running. I will see what I can find out. In the meantime, stay alert. Cornered people are the most dangerous. That afternoon, while reviewing the security camera footage from the previous day, I noticed something odd. A local florist's van had delivered flowers to my front gate, except I had not ordered any flowers, and my security team had not reported a delivery. I rewound the footage and zoomed in on the driver. Even though he wore a cap pulled low over his face, I immediately recognized Andrew's profile. They were already casing the house, testing our security protocols and looking for weaknesses. The trap was working. Now I just had to survive it. I called Agent Chen immediately. They are doing reconnaissance. Andrew delivered fake flowers today to check our security. We saw him, she confirmed. We have agents tailing him now. He is currently at the Lakeside Hotel with Victoria. They have been arguing for the last hour, according to our surveillance team. What are they arguing about? We cannot get close enough to hear clearly, but based on their body language, it looks intense. Victoria seems to be pressuring Andrew to do something, and he is resisting. I could picture the scene. Naomi pushing my son to act quickly to eliminate the threat I represented, while Andrew hesitated at the thought of directly harming his mother. Despite everything, I hoped there was still a small part of him that remembered the woman who had raised him, who had loved him unconditionally. But I could not count on that sentiment to protect me. The financial pressure from Morozov, combined with the threat of the FBI investigation, would eventually overcome any lingering filial affection. Andrew and Victoria would make their move soon. Let us increase security tonight, I suggested. Make it obvious. I want them to think twice, maybe delay until tomorrow. Why? Agent Chen asked. Because tomorrow is the anniversary of Richard's death. Andrew knows I always visit the cemetery in the morning. That would be the perfect opportunity for them to break in while you are away or to ambush you at the cemetery, Agent Chen pointed out. Either way, it gives us the chance to control the situation. We can prepare for both scenarios. Agent Chen agreed, and we spent the next 2 hours reviewing our plans. Additional FBI agents were stationed around my property, now visibly acting as security personnel. Others would accompany me to the cemetery disguised as mourners, but armed and ready for any trouble. That night I tried to sleep, but I found myself staring at the ceiling thinking about Andrew as a child. His first steps, his toothless smile when he lost his front teeth, the way he clung to me on his first day of kindergarten. Where had that sweet boy gone? At what point had he become a man capable of matricide? Perhaps the seeds had always been there, planted by Richard's materialistic values and fertilized by the privilege of wealth without responsibility. Or perhaps Naomi had corrupted him completely, turning his weaknesses into weapons against his own family. It no longer mattered. The son I had raised was gone, replaced by a stranger who saw me only as an obstacle to wealth. Tomorrow would determine if either of us would have a future. When dawn broke, I dressed in black as I always did for these cemetery visits, a ritual I had maintained for 5 years since Richard's death. Despite our troubled marriage and divorce, Andrew would expect me to maintain this pattern, especially with the eyes of the media on me. "The wire is working perfectly," Agent Chen confirmed, adjusting the tiny device hidden in my pearl necklace. "And the tracking device is active." She tapped the watch on my wrist. "Remember, Mrs. Bennett, do not engage Andrew or Victoria directly if you see them. Signal our team and move to a safe distance. Your only job is to stay alive." I nodded, though we both knew I might not have the luxury of following that advice if things went wrong. As I drove to the cemetery, followed discreetly by FBI vehicles, I felt strangely calm. After days of tension and fear, the prospect of finally confronting this situation brought me a certain peace. One way or another, this nightmare would end today. The cemetery was quiet in the early morning light, the dew still clinging to the grass between the headstones. I made my way to Richard's grave, hyper-aware of the FBI agents positioned strategically around the perimeter, appearing to be ordinary visitors, paying respects to their own deceased loved ones. I placed the white roses I had brought on Richard's headstone and stood in silence, thinking not of my ex-husband, but of the son we had raised together. Had Richard seen something in Andrew that I had missed? Had he known what our son could become? A twig snapped behind me, and I turned to see Andrew standing about 10 feet away alone and looking haggard. His expensive suit was wrinkled. His eyes were bloodshot, and his hands were shaking slightly as he approached. "Mom," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We need to talk." I looked at my son standing before me in the cemetery where his father was buried and felt a complex mix of emotions: love, betrayal, anger, and a deep, aching sadness for what could have been. "I do not think that is a good idea, Andrew," I said, keeping my voice steady. "My lawyer advised against any contact with you." "Please," Andrew said, taking another step forward. "Just 5 minutes. That is all I ask." I noticed he was scanning the cemetery, his eyes darting to each of the other mourners, the disguised FBI agents. Was he suspicious, or was he looking for Victoria? "Where is your wife?" I asked directly. Something flashed across Andrew's face: fear, maybe, or guilt. "She is not feeling well. The poisoning affected her more than the doctors initially thought." "How convenient." Andrew flinched at my tone, but continued. "Mom, I know what you think happened, but you are wrong. Victoria and I had nothing to do with the poison. Someone is setting us all up." I almost laughed at the sheer audacity of his lie. "Is that what you came to tell me? More lies?" "I am telling you the truth," he insisted, his voice taking on a desperate edge. "You have to believe me. We are all in danger." "From who, Andrew?" "From the loan sharks you owe money to, from the investors you scammed with your fake inheritance company, or from your wife whose real name is Naomi Jackson and who has killed at least 7 people before you." Andrew's face drained of color. "How do you know about Naomi, or about Bennett Future Holdings, or about James Morozov, who is expecting a return of $450,000 for his investment in your mother's death?" Andrew stumbled backward as if I had hit him. "Mom, I can explain." "Save it," I interrupted him. The FBI knows everything. They have been tracking Naomi for years, and now they are closing the net on both of you. The only question is whether you will go to prison for fraud or for attempted murder." Andrew's eyes widened, and he looked around again, this time with obvious panic. "You are working with the FBI. They are here right now." "What do you think?" He ran a shaking hand through his hair. "You do not understand the situation I am in. Morozov will kill me if I do not pay him. And that justifies trying to murder your own mother." "I never wanted to hurt you," Andrew said, his voice breaking. "It was Victoria's idea. I mean Naomi's. She said it would be painless. That you would just go to sleep and never wake up, but then you switched the cups somehow and everything went wrong." I stared at my son, unable to believe what I was hearing. "And that makes it better, that you thought you were killing me painlessly." I was desperate. Andrew's voice rose, drawing glances from the nearby FBI agents. "Morozov threatened to break my legs to hurt Victoria. He showed me pictures of what he did to the last person who could not pay. I was terrified. So you decided my life was worth less than your kneecaps." Andrew had the decency to look ashamed. "I did not see any other way out. I asked you for the money, but you refused." "Because I knew you were lying about what it was for," I said. "If you had told me the truth about the danger you were in, I could have helped you." "Would you have?" Andrew asked, suddenly bitter. "You have never approved of anything I have done. You changed your will to cut me out completely." "I changed my will to protect you from yourself," I corrected him. "The foundation would have provided you with a generous income while preventing you from squandering the entire fortune. I was trying to give you the chance to find a purpose beyond just money." Andrew shook his head. "It is too late for that now. Victoria, Naomi, she is not who I thought she was either." "What do you mean?" He looked over his shoulder nervously. "She is planning to kill me too, Mom. Once she gets the money. I found her research on untraceable poisons notes about my life insurance and offshore accounts only in her name. She never loved me. I was just her access to your fortune." I felt a flicker of pity for my son caught in a web partly of his own making. "Andrew, it is not too late to do the right thing. Help the FBI catch Naomi. Testify against her. You can still salvage something from this wreckage." He looked at me with desperate hope. "Would you help me if I cooperate? Would you speak to the prosecutors for me?" Before I could answer, a voice called out from behind Andrew. "Andrew, what are you doing?" Victoria was standing at the entrance to the cemetery, dressed impeccably in a black suit that looked more appropriate for a board meeting than a cemetery visit. Even from a distance, I could see the cold fury in her expression. "Victoria," Andrew said, turning to her with obvious fear. "I was just saying goodbye to your mother." Victoria finished for him, marching toward us with determination. "We discussed this, darling. Your emotions are clouding your judgment. She is manipulating you just like she always has." Victoria reached us and placed a possessive hand on Andrew's arm. Up close, I could see the calculating intelligence behind her eyes, evaluating the situation and adapting her strategy in real time. "Mrs. Bennett," she said with fake warmth, "you look well for someone under so much stress. I am surprised your doctors allow you to be out alone given your condition." "I am in perfect health, Victoria. Or should I call you Naomi?" Her smile never wavered, but her eyes hardened like flint. "I do not know what she has been telling you, Andrew, but she has been under tremendous strain. The doctors prescribe medication for her anxiety, but I am afraid she has not been taking it regularly." "Stop it, Victoria," Andrew said, pulling away from her. "No more lies. She knows everything about your true identity, about the other men you married, about the people you killed." Victoria's mask slipped for a moment, revealing the cold, calculating predator underneath. Then she laughed, a sound completely devoid of humor. "Oh, Andrew, you really are just as weak as your father was." She turned to me, dropping all pretense. "And you, Gloria, have been a worthy opponent. It almost makes me sad that it has to end like this." Her hand moved toward her purse, and I tensed, knowing she was probably armed. The FBI agents started to close in, but they were still too far away to intervene immediately. "It is over, Naomi," I said, using her real name deliberately. "The FBI has been building a case against you for years. They know about Harold Donovan in Phoenix, about Martin Williams in Santa Fe, about all of them." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across her face. "You are bluffing." "Am I? Why do you think we are having this conversation in a public place? Look around you." As Victoria looked around, several of the mourners started moving toward us with purpose, their hands reaching inside their jackets where their weapons were concealed. "You set a trap," she said, her voice filled with grudging respect. "I learned from the best," I replied. "You taught me how effective a good setup can be when you tried to frame me for your poisoning." Victoria's hand emerged from her purse, holding not a gun but a syringe. "Always have a backup plan, Gloria. That is something else you should have learned." She lunged at me with startling speed, the syringe aimed right at my neck. I stumbled backward, tripping over a headstone and falling hard to the ground. Victoria followed me down, her face twisted with determination. "Freeze, FBI!" shouted Agent Chen, sprinting toward us with her weapon drawn. But Victoria was already on top of me, the needle of the syringe glinting in the morning light. I grabbed her wrist with both hands, fighting to keep the needle away from my skin. "You should have died when you were supposed to." Victoria hissed her strength, surprising as she forced the needle closer to my neck. "And you should have picked a different family." I grunted, summoning a strength I did not know I had, and twisting her wrist sharply. Victoria cried out in pain, but she did not drop the syringe. We struggled on the ground, rolling over the damp grass, while FBI agents surrounded us, unable to fire for fear of hitting me. "Drop the weapon right now," Agent Chen ordered, her gun pointed directly at Victoria's head. In that momentary distraction, I drove my knee hard into Victoria's stomach. She gasped, her grip on the syringe loosening just enough for me to rip it from her hand and toss it aside. FBI agents swarmed in, pulling Victoria off me and forcing her to the ground. As they handcuffed her, she glared at me one last time. "This is not over, Gloria," she spat. "Not by a long shot." "Yes, it is," I said, standing up shakily. "You lost the moment you underestimated me." As they dragged Victoria away, I turned to find Andrew standing completely frozen, watching the scene in absolute horror. 2 FBI agents approached him, handcuffs ready. "Andrew Bennett, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, and racketeering," one of them announced. "You have the right to remain silent." Andrew did not resist as they cuffed him. As they led him past me toward their vehicle, he stopped. "Mom," he said, his voice breaking, "I'm so sorry. I never thought it would go this far." I looked at my son, the little boy I had raised, the man he had become, the stranger he was right now, and I felt nothing but a profound, deep sadness. "I am sorry too, Andrew," I said softly, "for whatever part I played in creating the man who could do this." As they took him away, I stood alone among the headstones, the morning sun warming my face, and I felt the heavy weight of the last few weeks finally begin to lift. It was not entirely over. There would be trials and testimonies, public scrutiny, and private pain. But the immediate danger had passed. I had survived, and more than that, I had fought back and won. 6 months later, I sat in a federal courtroom watching Naomi Jackson receive 4 consecutive life sentences for the murders she had committed across multiple states. The evidence against her was overwhelming. DNA, fingerprints, financial records, and most damning of all, the recorded confession she had made during our confrontation at the cemetery. Andrew received 25 years for conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, and racketeering. His cooperation with the authorities and testimony against Naomi had saved him from a life sentence, but he would be an old man by the time he was released. As he was led away in chains, he turned to look at me one last time. I saw remorse in his eyes, perhaps genuine, perhaps just regret at getting caught. Either way, it was far too late for us. The son I had raised was gone, replaced by a stranger who had been willing to murder me for money. The media had transformed me from alleged murderer to heroic victim practically overnight. Oil heiress helps FBI catch serial killer was much better publicity than my original headlines, and offers for books, movie rights, and interviews came pouring in. I turned them all down. Some stories were simply too personal to share with the entire world. Samuel had done an excellent job managing the legal fallout. All charges against me were dropped. My reputation was restored, and I was completely free to return to my quiet life on the estate. But quiet was no longer what I wanted. Using my considerable resources and Jonathan's connections in law enforcement, I had spent the last 6 months establishing the Bennett Foundation for Justice, an organization dedicated to supporting elderly victims of financial crimes and abuse. The foundation worked closely with law enforcement to identify and prosecute those who preyed on vulnerable seniors. While also providing resources to help victims rebuild their lives, the work gave me a clear purpose and helped transform my personal tragedy into something positive. Every time we helped an older person reclaim their dignity and safety, I felt a small measure of healing in my own heart. I also made significant changes to my will and the structure of Bennett Oil. The company would eventually become employee-owned, with profits shared among those who actually did the hard work, rather than flowing to distant shareholders. The vast bulk of my personal fortune would go directly to the Foundation for Justice, with smaller legacy gifts to various charities that held special meaning to me. One afternoon, as I sat in my study reviewing applications for the Foundation's Victim Support Program, Martha announced an unexpected visitor. "Mrs. Bennett, there is a young woman here to see you. She says her name is Lisa Donovan." The name rang a bell immediately. Donovan was the last name of one of Naomi's previous victims in Arizona. "Show her in, please." Lisa Donovan was in her early 30s, with her father's eyes and a guarded expression that spoke of hard-won caution. She stood awkwardly in the doorway of my study, clutching a small purse. "Mrs. Bennett, thank you for seeing me without an appointment. I have been following your case and, well, we have something in common." "Your father was Harold Donovan," I said softly, "Naomi Jackson's first victim." Lisa nodded, blinking back tears. "When I saw the news about your case, it was like everything finally made sense. For years, I knew something was wrong with my dad's death, but nobody would listen to me. Everyone just thought I was a grieving daughter who could not accept a natural death." I pointed to the chair across from me. "Please sit down. Would you like some tea?" For the next hour, Lisa shared her story. How her brother Robert had brought home his new girlfriend Naomi, the whirlwind romance that followed, and the subtle ways Naomi had begun to isolate her father from family and friends. "After my dad died, they took the money and disappeared. Robert stopped answering my calls, and when I finally tracked him down a year later, he was living in a motel drinking himself to death. Naomi had left him once the cash ran out." "I am so sorry," I said, recognizing the deep pain of betrayal in her eyes. When they arrested Naomi, I felt vindicated but also incredibly empty. It does not bring my dad back, and it does not heal the damage she did to our family. "No, it does not," I agreed. "Justice is sometimes a very cold comfort." Lisa hesitated, then asked the question that had clearly brought her here. "How do you do it? How do you move forward after someone you completely trusted betrays you?" It was the exact question I had been asking myself for months. "I wish I had a simple answer for you. It has been about finding purpose in the pain, creating something meaningful out of this nightmare, so that others can avoid what we went through." I told her about the Bennett Foundation for Justice and our work with elderly victims of fraud and abuse. "In fact," I said, struck by a sudden thought, "we are actually looking for someone to run our victim advocacy program. We need someone who understands firsthand exactly what our clients are going through. Would you be interested?" Lisa's eyes widened. "Me, but I have no experience in—" "You have the most important kind of experience," I interrupted her gently. You know what it is like to be ignored when you are trying to protect someone you love. You know the pain of absolute betrayal and the long road to healing afterward. That is worth more than any degree or certification. For the first time since she had walked into my study, Lisa smiled. I would really like that. I would love to help other people make sense of what happened to them. As Lisa left with an appointment to come back and discuss the position further, I felt a sense of rightness that had been missing since this whole ordeal began. I could not change what Andrew and Naomi had done, but I could definitely change what would happen next, not just for me, but for others like Lisa and her father. 2 weeks later, I received a letter from Andrew. It was full of apologies, long explanations, and desperate pleas for forgiveness. He claimed that Naomi had manipulated him, that he had never intended for things to go so far, and that he still loved me despite everything that had happened. I read the letter twice, then fed it into my fireplace. Some betrayals are simply too deep for forgiveness. Some wounds will never fully heal. Andrew had chosen Naomi and her blood money over the mother who had given him absolutely everything, and now he could live with the consequences of that choice. The foundation grew rapidly over the next year, expanding into 3 different states and helping hundreds of elderly victims reclaim their dignity and security. I found myself traveling frequently, speaking at conferences, and meeting with law enforcement agencies about better protections for vulnerable seniors. On the 1-year anniversary of the cemetery confrontation, I visited Richard's grave again, this time with proper security and no hidden agendas. As I placed white roses on his headstone, I reflected on the journey of the past year. The Bennett name would survive, but it would be associated with justice and true compassion instead of the toxic family dysfunction that Andrew and Naomi had represented. The oil wells were still pumping out their black gold, but now that wealth flowed to employees who had earned it and to causes that truly deserved it. As for me, I had discovered a strength I never knew I possessed. The capacity to face unimaginable betrayal, fight against impossible odds, and emerge not just surviving but thriving. The lonely widow in an overly large mansion had been replaced by a woman with a genuine purpose, surrounded by colleagues who shared her mission and friends who valued her for herself, not for her bank account. That evening, I hosted a small gathering at my house for the foundation staff, a celebration of our first year and the many lives we had managed to change. As I looked around at these people who had become my new chosen family, I raised my glass in a toast. To second chances, I said, and to the truth that sometimes we find our greatest strength in our darkest moments. Later, as the guests left and the house grew quiet, I stood on my terrace watching the sunset paint the oil derricks in gold and crimson. 1 year ago, I had been fighting for my life against the very people I should have been able to trust the most. Now I was building a legacy that would help others long after I was gone. Some would call it revenge, this systematic dismantling of everything Andrew and Naomi had tried to achieve, but I preferred to think of it as justice, not just for me, but for Harold Donovan and everyone else whose lives had been destroyed by pure greed and betrayal. I had completely refused to be a victim. I had fought back with every resource at my disposal, and in doing so, I had discovered that the greatest inheritance I could leave behind was not money or property, or even the Bennett family name. It was the example of a woman who at 68 years old had faced the worst betrayal imaginable and had somehow transformed it into a powerful force for good. That was a legacy truly worth having. Welcome to our story, family, and thank you for following my story to its conclusion. I hope it serves as a reminder that age does not determine strength, and that sometimes the most important battles we fight are against those closest to us. What would you have done in my place? Have you ever had to reinvent yourself after a deep betrayal? Comment below and share your thoughts. And if you enjoyed my story, do not forget to check out 2 other favorites on the channel. My Daughter Stole My Identity, and The Neighbor Who Tried to Steal My House. Until next time.